So our dissolve.org site does have a registration form, and I'm previewing this now in the browser. This is just the default form, and notice that if I click, I do get some feedback in terms of at least letting me know where my focus is, but that's really being handled right now by CSS anyway, so everything else seems to be working okay, but I'm not getting any user feedback. I have no idea whether that's a good password or not. To be honest with you, I don't even know what I typed. And there's nothing here outside of some cool CSS work. There's really nothing there to help me fill out this form. So we need to take this form and upgrade it using some of our spry validation widgets. So our first step in adding client-side validation to our forms will be to replace some of the existing form elements in our registration form with spry validation form widgets. We'll first replace the email and password text fields, since both of them include information that is required for people to register with our site. As we add the widgets to the page, we'll also set options for each widget that will control which message is displayed if the data is not valid, and choose exactly when to have spry validate the data. So there's a lot of options available to us here. So I'll go back into Dreamweaver. Now, for those of you who are kind of new to the party here and are following along with me, we need to go ahead and set a default directory for our spry assets so that Dreamweaver is adding those to the right folder. So I'm going to go in the 0401 folder. I'm going to right-click, choose New Folder. We're going to call this spry assets. Again, that just keeps it consistent with what Dreamweaver normally uses, although you could name this anything that you want. The next thing we have to do is go up to our Files panel, go up to the name of your site and double-click that. That'll open up our site definition dialog box. And in the Advanced tab, we want to go down to the spry category. And here we'll browse, and we'll go into Chapter 4, 0401, Spry Assets. Select or choose on the Mac, and then click OK. And we are ready and raring to go. So I'm going to scroll down and find my existing email element within the form. We're going to replace this with the spry validation widget. Now, the interesting thing here, guys, is if you're hand coding this, you really wouldn't have to delete anything, but because we're not hand coding it and we want to go through the automated process of having Dreamweaver insert this, I'm going to go ahead and select both the label and the form element, and I'm going to delete them. I want to make sure I don't get rid of the paragraph that's there, but I need the label tag gone and I need the input tag gone. So if you're not entirely comfortable with what's going on here, you might want to do that in code view. So if we go up to our insert toolbar and find our spry panel, we can see that we have all of these spry validation widgets. You don't always have to go to spry to find that. You can click on the forms insert toolbar as well, and they are all right there. So you can insert these as you're building out your forms out as well. They're the same exact items. So I'm going to go ahead and do a spry validation text field. Now, the interesting thing here is if you've ever built a form in Dreamweaver, this is instantly recognizable. You've done this before. So we're going to go ahead and give this an ID, which is email for this particular form element. The label is going to say email with a colon and a capital E. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with forms, the ID is the name of the element itself. The label is the text that's going to show up beside that. We're going to attach the label using a for attribute, and we have our form elements tabbed indexed, so the tab index of that element will be 20. We'll go ahead and click OK. Now, that had nothing to do with form validation. It had everything to do with making sure that the form element meets accessibility standards, and that's something that is a preference that you can turn on or off inside Dreamweaver. I'm going to go ahead and select the form element itself, and using the Properties Inspector, I'm going to grab the Class pull-down menu and choose Text. You know, we're a good bit into inserting this form validation widget, and we haven't seen really anything to do with spry so far at all. Well, there's one thing different. Notice that when we clicked on the text field, around it we have this little blue spry tab that says Spry Text Field. And if I click on that tab, now the Properties Inspector is reflecting all of those spry validation properties. Okay, so this is a spry text field. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the Type pull-down menu, and notice that you can validate against certain required items, such as a credit card number or a date. In our case, we want an email address, so I'm going to validate that versus an email address. So the JavaScript will make sure that whatever somebody enters here is at least an email address in terms of the @ symbol and the .com or .org or whatever it may be. Now, I can also validate this, and notice that by default, when the form is submitted, Spry is going to validate this form. But I can also validate it on blur, which means when somebody leaves focus, or on change as somebody's typing that in. I only want to validate that on blur and submit because as they're typing in it, I don't want to say, hey, make sure you type in an email address. But you could do that if you wanted to. The next thing that happens is here we have a preview state. If I grab that pull-down menu, this is what the form element looks like initially when somebody first loads the site up. Next, we have the required format, and you can see it changes color, it has a red background color, and now it says a value is required right out there to the side. In the invalid format, we could say invalid format. Now we want to make that a little bit more specific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the required, and I'm going to highlight the text right here that says a value is required. You'll notice that I didn't highlight the period. There's a little bit of a bug inside Dreamweaver here. And if you highlight the whole text, sometimes it doesn't allow you to actually change it. You have to go in code view and do it. So if you're going to stick with working in design view, my advice is to not select the whole thing. All right, I'm going to type in valid email, please. And if you want, you can replace the period with an exclamation point if you're really, really serious about it. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the invalid format. I'm going to let them know what that format should be. I'm just going to type in valid email, please. Now, how in the world is all this structured, right? Well, if I highlight this and switch over to code view, you can see that these messages are really just inside of span tag. And the span tag will display dynamically based upon whether the form element is valid or not. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'll notice that it's going to copy over the spry assets folder that we set as the default folder, spry validation textfield.css, and the spry validation textfield.js. So both the JavaScript and the cascading style sheets that enable it to work. So I'm going to do a save all and preview that in my browser. So now when I click inside our email, I don't really get anything, but then when I start typing, I don't get anything. But let's say I just don't feel like typing in a full email address, and I hit tab. It tells me, hey, you need a valid email, please. And if I just typed it in incorrectly and hit tab, it goes away. Same's true of submitting the form. If I go down and submit it, it immediately gives me that same user feedback that I need a valid email. So now we're getting somewhere. It would be pretty counterproductive to have somebody register for our site without knowing your email address. So now that we have our validation widget in there, we're ensuring that they're at least typing in an email address, whether it's valid or not. So we're not quite done yet. So next we'll deal with validating our password text field and adding a confirmation widget as well.